Okay, we're going to build directly off of what we talked about last night. Well, last night for me, whatever time of day it was for you. Sorry about the confusion there. But we're going to switch. We talked about the rebellion of Lucifer in heaven. We talked about the work of Christ on earth. We're going to jump 1,800 more years down to about the 1890s. And this is what we can look back at as the last time around. Get some setting here. On from October to November of 1888, there was a ministerial institute and a general conference session was held at the brand newly built, newly constructed church at Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is the famous 1888 General Conference. So if you're familiar with Righteousness by Faith and Jones and Wagner and Butler and Smith and the 10 horns and the all that stuff, that's this occasion. Okay, a lot of things went on there. It's famous because of that. There is one aspect that came directly out of this meeting that is often overlooked. And that is, as Ellen White would write 15 years later, after the meeting at Minneapolis, Dr. Kellogg was a converted man, and we all knew it. We could see the converting power of God working in his heart and life. And that, to me, is just fascinating. What was different? What could they see? Well, let's go on. I'll just tell you. In a nutshell, is very untechnical. But after this conversion experience, Dr. Kellogg began being nice to people. It sounds a little anticlimactic, perhaps, but it's true. That's the primary difference, was his level of interest and concern for others. And Dr. Kellogg was not a normal human being. He was one who was going to make a mark in life. And so when he was nice to people, it took on larger proportions, say, than perhaps for the rest of us. And so in the year 1892, actually the groundwork was laid in 90 and 91, but in 1892, Dr. Kellogg started 3 specific projects. One of these was the Haskell Home for Orphaned Children. That's a picture of it there. It was an orphanage. And a lot of interesting stories you can tell about that, but I'm not going to. Just suffice it to say that he was doing a humanitarian type of work united with his work for the church. The second of these projects was the Visiting Nurses Program, which was a charity work down in Chicago, in the worst areas of Chicago. It was known as the stockyards, sometimes referred to as Hell's Half Acre. A lot of people objected to that name because it was obviously half an acre. And these nurses went in there and they treated the people with the utmost of respect and courtesy and professionalism. And the people in that area loved those nurses, and they did a lot of good. The third item, in some ways, my favorite, was that Dr. Kellogg proposed and actually carried out the beginnings of the Christian Help Band movement. Can't take a lot of time to discuss this because I'm going to be hurrying along today, but the Christian Help Band was simply a group of Christians that were banded together to try and help the people around them. That is the one form of medical missionary work that Ellen White never counsels or cautions or proves that I've been able to find. When it comes to Christian Help Band work, her attitude was always, yeah, go ahead, do that. What a great idea. We're going to move quickly. In that same year, 1892, a really significant thing happened that might appear to be entirely separate from what Dr. Kellogg was doing. And that is that Ellen White published a famous statement. She wrote, "The time of test is just upon us, for the loud cry of the third angel has already begun in the revelation of the righteousness of Christ, the sin-pardoning Redeemer. This is the beginning of the light of the angel whose glory shall fill the whole earth." You know, if you have a a chart, a timeline of the great controversy going from the left to the right. This statement here represents the furthest that we've ever gotten. The loud cry had begun. That's an amazing thing. Of course, Ellen White was writing this from Australia. She was there at the time. But about 2 months later, there was another General Conference session, the General Conference of 1893. And at that General Conference, Dr. Kellogg spoke, and he had a lot to say, much of it very, very interesting, historically and all sorts of other reasons. I won't go off into those stories. But he made a really fascinating assertion. He said, the loud cry is going to begin with our doing the things that the Lord in the 58th chapter of Isaiah says come before the loud cry. So he says we must draw out our souls to hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul. He says if we will do this, our light will shine. Well, this is such a fascinating statement. It is 2 months after Ellen White makes the comment that the loud cry had begun, Dr. Kellogg stands up in the General Conference and says, this is how the loud cry is supposed to unfold. It's Isaiah 58. He said the promises at the end represent the loud cry, but the conditions are if you deal your bread to the hungry and all that kind of thing, right? He went on in his presentation. He said, if the loud cry has been begun by our people, and he's not arguing there, he's just simply making that as a kind of an assertion type of thing. If the loud cry has been begun by our people, it must be because we have just begun to do a little in the way of letting our light shine. But we've done so little in that way that it seems to me that before the loud cry will make any great noise in the world, we will have to let our light shine a great deal brighter than we have ever yet done. Because the works come first. The light must shine through these good works before we can be called the repairers of the breach and the restorers of the paths to dwell in. For that promise comes after all of these conditions, you see. What I want you to notice here is that Dr. Kellogg is really describing the same method of work, the same kind of work that Jesus used to reveal the character of God. Remember, we saw that yesterday. In his work to reveal the character of God, Jesus united what we might call medical missionary work and ministerial work. I like to refer to it as preaching, teaching, helping, healing. He brought that all together, and that was the only way he could do that. Ellen White puts the idea like this. The union of Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul is the true interpretation of the gospel. Now, it doesn't say is a true interpretation. It says it is the true interpretation. And that means that all other interpretations are, to some extent at least, not the true one. Kellogg had somehow grasped this idea. Everyone else overlooked it, essentially, or nearly, or whatever. It was not a common thought. And Kellogg said, no. We can't be the light of the world. We can't give the loud cry unless we're doing it the same way Jesus did. Ellen White again, God's purpose in committing to men and women the mission that he committed to Christ is to disentangle his followers from all worldly policy and to give them a work identical with the work that Christ did. Now, Ellen White would write this, of course, both of these comments years later, but Kellogg was certainly championing the same idea in the General Conference of 1893, that the work that we have been given is the same as the work that Christ had done. So to put this in a nutshell, and these are all just my words here, so don't take this as absolute inspiration or anything. But Dr. Kellogg was at the General Conference of 1888. He was converted there. He came to understand what righteousness by faith really is. And he took the teaching of Jones and Wagner. Jones and Wagner said, very overly simplified, they said, Jesus is what you need. Christ is all you need. If you have Christ, then you have what you need. They struggled to express that in the best possible way, but Kellogg seemed to grasp the idea. And these are not his words, these are mine, but it's like as if he said, well, if Jesus is all that I need, and I have Jesus, I have all that I need. So now I can spend my life helping other people. It's that combination, I would maintain, the theology of Jones and Wagner and the applied theology of Dr. Kellogg. That's the combination that led to the beginning of the loud cry by November of 1892. Now, it was only the beginning. As Dr. Kellogg said, it hadn't made a great deal of noise yet. It certainly wasn't on the front page of the New York Times. It wasn't on the front page of anything, to be honest. Adventists themselves would not have known that the loud cry had started if Ellen White hadn't said it. So it was a pretty quiet loud cry at that point. But she identified it. She says, it's happening. And notice in that comment, she did not write the proclamation of the righteous Christ. She said the revelation. Just as Jesus came to reveal the character of the Father, this was the revelation of the character of Christ. Well, let's go on. By 1897, however, things look much different. So we're jumping from 1892 to 1897, only 5 years. Ellen White is writing, medical missionary work must leave room for the ministry of the word. Contempt is never to be expressed in regard to the promulgation of God's word. The third angel's message must not be smothered to death. I have laid out the matter as it has been presented to me. The third angel's message, in the place of swelling into a loud cry, is being smothered. Well, what had gone wrong? Well, quite a lot, really. In those years in between, 1892, actually beginning before 1892, but up through till about 1896, 97, here are a few of the things that were happening. Some of Dr. Kellogg's brethren had failed to stand with him in the first of his experience in connection with health reform. They weren't supporting that. Some tried to make the work of Dr. Kellogg as hard as possible in order to build themselves up. Some rejected the light on health reform, and in the process, they rejected God. And some flat out made war on Dr. Kellogg. Now, I emphasize some, because it's not everyone. But there were some. I can't give you a percentage, but these comments were particularly directed at the ministry. Don't know why, but that's what happened. So there was opposition against what Kellogg was doing, which was a loud cry. And that was a most unfortunate thing. The Lord has given Dr. Kellogg his work. It is a fact that our ministers are very slow to become health reformers, notwithstanding all the light which the Lord has given upon this subject. This has caused Dr. Kellogg to lose confidence in them. Their tardy work in health reform has created in him a spirit of criticism, and he has borne down on them in an unsparing manner, which the Lord does not sanction. He has belittled the gospel ministry, and in his regard and ideas has placed the medical missionary work above the ministry. So basically what happened is that Kellogg was opposed. He got a lot of opposition. They made war upon him. Some made war upon him. And eventually, I would, if I had to put a date on it, I would say maybe 1896, 1897, about that time frame. Dr. Kellogg just, he was a human. He was human. And he got fed up and he said, stupid ministers. Stupid ministers. I'm not going to work with you guys. You're not helping at all. So Ellen White writes to Dr. Kellogg. This is not the first such letter here, but this is a particularly clear one from 1900. She said, the Lord has sent you warnings, but you have not heeded them. The deceptive power of the enemy has led you to leave God's banner trailing in the dust. The work has been hindered. The cause of God should have a different showing, far different. And who is to blame for this hindrance? You give heed to men not of our faith. You delight to know what you have done, and by a free use of money that was not yours to handle, in a way that God has not appointed. Well, basically what was going on here is that Dr. Kellogg, in 1893, 94 type of thing, he was starting a city mission work down in Chicago. And in many ways, this was an outgrowth of the visiting nurses program, and there was much that was good about it. But in time, Kellogg was spending way too much time and listening way too much to non-Adventist counselors, shall we say, acquaintances. And he began to want to build up this work in Chicago, really as a matter, Ellen White says, as a monument to himself. He was shutting off the ministers, they were helping him, and so he was determined he was going to do more than the rest of them put together. And you know what? There's a pretty good argument you could say that he did. He did a lot. Some of it was good. Some of it was not. One of the things that he did and was very good at was raising money. He'd go to a camp meeting and he could tell stories. He could tell wonderful stories, and people would give him money and he would spend that money. And this was actually creating a shortage of cash for many other projects around the world, including establishing the work in Australia, which is where Ellen White was at the time, right? And they were in Australia. They were always pinching their pennies. They hardly ever had a dime. It was nothing but pennies. And so things were tight, and this was largely Kellogg's fault. And he, from listening to men not of our faith, with a bit of a broad brush oversimplification of that, I might just say that at least the most significant example of that would have been listening to an organization known as the American Association of Medical Colleges. That would be the educational branch of the American Medical Association. And they were telling Kellogg that he needed to build a hospital in downtown Chicago. And if any of you are familiar with the story of the Chicago building, right, that was never built, and that whole thing, if that rings a bell with you, that's the building. That's what it was all about. But let's go on. So that's the way things stood in 1900. Well, they squeaked through another year or so. Of course, Ellen White came back to the United States in September of 1900. And then the next big event we're going to notice in February 1902, February 18, 1902, the sanitarium in about 4:30 in the morning caught fire and was reduced to ground level basically by about 6 or 7 that morning. This was a huge challenge. Dr. Kellogg could have got something really good out of this experience. He could have taken Ellen White's advice and split up this large institution into many, 5, 6, 10, whatever, small sanitariums scattered around the country. Ellen White had been advocating that sort of an idea. But instead, Kellogg determined to rebuild in Battle Creek. It was easier for him to control one large institution than to control a bunch of little ones scattered around. And he was, by this time, very suspicious that the ministers were going to try and take over all his projects. And there were some who were doing that. Yes, bear in mind, they did make war on him, right? So he got a little paranoid about that sort of thing. And he says, no way, I'm going to make multiple places. I'm going to build one big one. But that posed a problem because that was going to be expensive, and the insurance on the building only covered about 40% of it. So how are you going to come up with the money? Well, Dr. Kellogg had a plan. It seems that he had just recently written a book. You may have heard of it. It was known as The Living Temple. And he had, of course, Kellogg was a prolific author. He wrote 50-some books in his lifetime. And that's actually how he made his living. He never did accept the salary from the sanitarium. So he said, you know what, I've just written this book, and I'll tell you what I'll do. If we can put this whole thing together as a package, we could raise a lot of money with this. I will donate all my royalties off of the book. Let's get the Review and Herald to print it at cost, and let's get the church members to sell it without taking their canvasser's slice out of the deal, so to speak. Let's let all the profit go to rebuilding the sanitarium. That seems like a great idea. In fact, the General Conference committee said, wow, what a wonderfully generous thing. And so they said, what a great idea. Well, of course, this led to problems because eventually it was discovered that this book has elements of pantheism. Pantheism is the belief that God is in everything, from rocks to air to bunny rabbits and dolphins and mosquitoes and people too. God is everywhere. God is everything is the idea of pantheism. It's an age-old concept of Hinduism. In more recent time, it's been repackaged, so to speak, modernized and repackaged for the Western world, which is kind of crazy when you get down to understand what's actually going on. But much of the popularity of pantheism is due to the idea that if everything is God, then clearly I am God. And if I'm God, I really don't need somebody to tell me what to do. I certainly don't need to worry about what some old book has to say. After all, I'm God. Well, unsurprisingly, Ellen White was not enthusiastic about this book. She wrote warning about the book. And in doing so, she used some interesting terminology, which we're going to look at here. She wrote, Living Temple contains the alpha of these theories. I knew that the omega would follow in a little while, and I trembled for our people. Well, you probably already know this, especially in the days of COVID variants, but alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, and omega is the last letter. So for us, it would be like A to Z or Z. I'm not sure what they call it in Australia. Of course, we see this in Revelation, right? Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. But Ellen White here is talking about erroneous theories. And she says, Living Temple contains the Alpha, but the Omega will follow in a little while. Well, another statement, she says, in the book Living Temple, there is presented the alpha of deadly heresies. The omega will follow and will be received by those who are not willing to heed the warning God has given. One more here, just to give you some indication of how serious this was. Writing to Dr. Kellogg, she said, when you wrote that book, you were not under the inspiration of God. There was by your side the one who inspired Adam to look at God in a false light. This is not a good recommendation. No one needs that individual by their side. My point here is simply that Dr. Kellogg, who was uniquely chosen, Ellen White describes him as God's physician. She says he was the greatest physician in the world. He was able to accomplish more for God's work than any other one man. She makes him. There are Bible characters like Abraham and Moses and David. They're just not normal people. Well, Kellogg was not a normal person. But when he left the Lord's service, he flipped the traces, and he was more closely associated with the devil than anyone else in Ellen White's writings. Another example. You have worked as Lucifer worked in the heavenly courts to persuade his associates to unite with him. He has used his arts upon your mind. Your boasted study of science and your assertion that you had obtained something excellent have deceived the men connected with you, and they have refused to listen to the warning sent to keep them from listening to your false representations. As I am shown these special things of Satan's science and how he deceived the holy angels, I am afraid of men who have entered into the study of the science that Satan carried into the warfare in heaven. Oh, how I have longed to be where I should not be compelled to see the same science practiced on this earth by medical practitioners. That's why we started off looking at Lucifer, because there are echoes of Lucifer, shall we say. The point is, there is a lot to learn about the controversy from the events of the past. So we've looked at, let's see, I guess I should read this. I forgot that. It is not John Kellogg. She's writing here to the General Conference President, by the way. It is not John Kellogg that we're dealing with. It is a being who once figured in the courts of heaven as an exalted angel. The poor doctor is not in his right mind. Okay, so as to the historical settings or occasions or occurrences, we've looked at Lucifer's rebellion, and we traced down 4,000 years to Christ's response. And then very, very briefly, I know, but we've mentioned at least the good Kellogg and his role in the beginning of the loud cry. And then we've gone to the bad Kellogg and his role in the institution of the Alpha of Apostasy. This is all interesting stuff, but I don't like it for history's sake. I like it for helping me understand the present and the future. So what about the future? Is there something useful in all this, or is it just merely interesting? Well, no, I think it's deadly useful because the Alpha of Apostasy will certainly be followed, as Ellen White said, by the Omega of Apostasy. And the beginning, but then smothered loud cry will yet find the final loud cry, which is what refutes Satan's accusations that we looked at yesterday. Okay, moving on quickly. Satan deceives and corrupts the world. But in so doing, he is only carrying on his original work. He has introduced no new arguments. He has created no new empire of darkness from which to draw supplies for the furtherance of these deceptions. I think this is hugely important. He doesn't have anything new. He's already used up his playbook. If we understand what he did in the past, there's no reason for us to be caught flat-footed and totally surprised. Now, there's no question that Lucifer is going to try to disguise his work. He doesn't want us to recognize it. He doesn't want us to be alarmed. He's going to try and disguise it or camouflage it. He might even find some way to hide spiritual issues under cover of something that he could pass off as merely being public health issues. That's a possibility. He might do that sort of thing. I frankly didn't expect it, but it looks like that's what he's done. But once we see what's going on, once the basic principles start to show up, we really should be able to recognize them as the same thing that Lucifer did in heaven and with Kellogg and in Jesus' day and all the way through. He has no new arguments. But we're going to zero in specifically on one particular kind of attack. And I think it's fair to say that Satan's favorite kind of camouflage for his attacks is a counterfeit. There's lots of examples of this. Idols instead of the true God back in Old Testament times, right? The Mass instead of Christ's priesthood in New Testament times or Dark Age times. Stay instead of Sabbath, demons impersonating departed loved ones, right? There's a counterfeit there, etc., etc. I'm sure there's others. This approach has worked well for him in the past. He's going to keep on doing it. You can just count on that. But notice this. This is fascinating. Before the final visitation of God's judgments upon the earth, there will be, among the people of the Lord, such a revival of primitive godliness as has not been witnessed since apostolic times. The enemy of souls desires to hinder this work, and before time for such a movement shall come, he will endeavor to prevent it by introducing a counterfeit. Under a religious guise, Satan will seek to extend his influence over the Christian world. But now, okay, so there's going to be a revival of primitive godliness, but Satan has a counterfeit. But it's really important here. that we have some idea what primitive godliness is supposed to look like. If primitive godliness is doctrinal purity, well, the counterfeit would probably be some false doctrine. If primitive godliness is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, well, then the counterfeit might be the charismatic movement, right? Speaking in tongues, all that kind of thing. If primitive godliness is Christian unity, well, the counterfeit might be the ecumenical movement. And actually, I've heard all of those. I've heard people apply this statement to all of those things, and probably a few others if I work on it a little bit more. This is important. If we are very suspicious, if we're expecting to find a counterfeit $50 bill, we may not be paying any attention to the $100 bills. So I think it's important that we know what primitive godliness is actually supposed to look like before we go looking for a counterfeit. A few key thoughts. Christ's method alone will give true success. Would primitive godliness be anything different? The great object that brought Christ to the earth was to reveal the Father. We saw that yesterday. God is love. This was the great truth that Christ came to the world to reveal. The object of Christ's mission to the world was to reveal the Father. In all his ministry, all his self-denial and sacrifice, Christ's object was to reveal the Father. Reveal God to the world. You get so used to that one phrase, it mindlessly repeat it. We looked at this yesterday. My argument is that this is primitive godliness. A few more statements. The world needs today what it needed 1900 years ago, a revelation of Christ. Well, we could say 2,000 years ago now, I suppose, but it needs the revelation of Christ. What the world needs today is the light of Christ's example reflected from the lives of Christ-like men and women. Well, that's the revelation of Christ, but the challenging part is Jesus isn't here. He wants to have that revelation through his people. It's a fascinating statement. I don't have it in the presentation here. It says that Christ intends the church to be the continued incarnation of Christ. Continued incarnation. Really fascinating idea. Of Christ in the man or woman that captivates the hearts of men and women. They behold the beautiful character of Christ revealed by good works. Okay. So my argument, if you wish here, is that this is what primitive godliness looks like. God's purpose in committing to men and women. I think we had this earlier, right? I've repeated it here. But this idea that this is an identical work. He's given us a work identical with the work that Christ did. And the glory of the character of Christ can never be expressed in words. Human language is inadequate to reveal it. It must be made manifest in the life. It is to be manifest in the individual Christian, in the family, in the church, in the ministry of the word, and in every institution established by God's people. We're to do a work identical with the work that Jesus did. And Jesus could not reveal his Father by words alone. We can't either. We need to wake up and realize it. If something's impossible for Jesus, it's going to be impossible for us too. And that's why in our work of revealing the character of God, we need to use the same methods that Jesus used, which were things like this. Christ, the great medical missionary, is our example. He healed the sick and preached the gospel. That's your blended work, preaching, teaching, helping, healing. In his service, healing and teaching were linked closely together. Today, they are not to be separated. The Holy Spirit never has and never will in the future divorce the medical mission work from the gospel ministry. They cannot be divorced. Bound up with Jesus Christ, the ministry of the word and the healing of the sick are one. Do you remember the Greek word I mentioned yesterday? The word was sozo, right? Sozo. It means both physical healing and spiritual salvation. It's the same word. in Greek, because at a deeper level than we're used to thinking, healing and salvation are really the same thing. The union of Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul is the true interpretation of the gospel. Again, we've had that before, but I want to stress it. This is what primitive godliness would look like. Well, we can double check ourselves. Because if that's what primitive godliness is like, then perhaps we can find a prediction in the spirit of prophecy as to what kind of a counterfeit it may be that Satan's working up. And indeed, that's true. Wonderful scenes with which Satan will be closely connected will soon take place. God's word declares that Satan will work miracles. He will make people sick and then will suddenly remove from them his satanic power. They will then be regarded as healed. These works of apparent healing will bring Seventh-day Adventists to the test. Well, that sounds a little ominous, right? Bring us to the test. And it's interesting, this is health related, right? Miracles and healing, that sort of thing. Often though, when we talk about Satan counterfeiting God's work at the end of time, this health related aspect here gets lost sight of, because in our minds we jump further ahead and we think of this detail here, right? Upon the air, Christ has come, Christ has come. The people prostrate themselves in adoration before him, while he lifts up his hands and pronounces a blessing upon them, as Christ blessed his disciples when he was upon the earth. His voice is soft and subdued, yet full of melody. In gentle, compassionate tones, he presents some of the same gracious heavenly truths which the Savior uttered. He heals the diseases of the people, and then, in his assumed character of Christ, he claims to have changed Sabbath to Sunday. Well, this is the impersonation of Christ. This is Satan appearing, trying to claim that he's Christ. We often jump all the way to that when we talk about counterfeits. But even here, notice this part, right? He heals the diseases of the people. Satan knows what Jesus looked like. He's trying to do exactly what he has to do to look like Jesus. Satan will come in to deceive, if possible, the very elect. He claims to be Christ, and he is coming in pretending to be the great medical missionary. Well, okay. In one sense, all this is the obvious stuff, really. I mean, it's a big thing when Lucifer himself is impersonating Christ. But whether or not we fall for this stuff, I think has been decided long before. And it'll be decided by a far less flashy, but actually a much more important issue. We can see that in some of these quotations. Satan can present a counterfeit so closely resembling the truth that it deceives those who are willing to be deceived. Oh, okay. So Satan can present a very convincing counterfeit. So you might be thinking, well, a miracle of Satan could look a lot like a miracle of God. And I'm sure that's probably true. But there's something else in play here. Notice that last little phrase, those who are willing to be deceived. What does that mean? And who would possibly be willing to be deceived? You're going to stick your hand up and say, I'd like to be deceived. No, nobody's going to do that. Well, fortunately, those dots at the end of the text mean there's more to come, and that's where we're going to find our answer. But I want you to think first, what could possibly make someone willing to be deceived? Now, before we look at the rest of that paragraph, I'm going to give you a hint. 4 slides back, we looked at this quotation about wonderful scenes and bringing Adventists to the test. But the paragraph has more to it. And this is maybe the most important part. Many who have had great light will fail to walk in the light because they have not become one with Christ. His instruction is not palatable to them. Well, it looks like when these works of apparent healing bring evidence to the test, the question really matters. The one that really matters is whether or not they become one with Christ. And the reason many fail there is not because they don't know enough natural remedies. I'm a big fan of natural remedies. Don't take that as any sort of an insult. Nor is it because they don't have the technical diagnostic skills to tell the difference between an evil miracle and a righteous miracle. The statement says it's because they didn't like Jesus' instruction. It wasn't palatable to them. Palatable. It's kind of a strange way to express it. It didn't taste good. So now, the answer to the question, what does it take to be willing to be deceived? With that palatability issue in mind, it may not be such a surprise. Here's what she says. Those who are willing to be deceived, those who desire to shun the self-denial and self-sacrifice demanded by the truth. That's all it takes to be willing to be deceived. Self-denial and self-sacrifice. Hold that idea for a minute, because I've got another puzzle for you, another question. Statement says, the truth for this time, the third angel's message is to be proclaimed with a loud voice, meaning with increasing power as we approach the great final test. This test must come to the churches in connection with the true ... True what? What is this great final test? It comes to the church in connection with the true something. This is one where if I have a live audience, I really like to, try to pull answers out of the people. It's something that's true. What was that?
Medical missionary. Work.
Oh, somebody knows the answer. A lot of people think it comes in connection with the true Sabbath. And yeah, I'm sure that's true too. But the statement actually says, this test must come to the churches in connection with the true medical missionary work. A work that has the great physician to dictate and preside in all it comprehends. Why does the great final test have to be in connection with medical missionary work? Well, because real medical missionary work is always self-denial and self-sacrifice. When you help people, it will always cost you something. Time, money, food, clothes, effort, something. Whatever you put into helping someone else is just that much that you don't have for yourself. And that's what medical missionary work is all about. It's all based on a very, very fundamental idea. One that we looked at yesterday. This is the idea that Lucifer rejected. Simply put, real medical missionary work is going to cost you so much that you are going to have faith that God will take care of you. If not, you're going to go out of business. You have to trust God. You have to have faith in God. You have to believe that He is smart enough and loving enough and powerful enough to take care of you. Lucifer rejected that idea. He said, no, I'm going to take care of myself. Real medical missionary work, you can't take care of yourself. It's self-denial, it's self-sacrifice. It will be. And eventually, not always, not at every point in time, but eventually, it will certainly come to the point where it's impossible for you to continue doing what you're doing and keep yourself alive. And yet, God helps you keep doing it. Back in Kellogg's day, Ellen White was shown not only the Lord's battle plan, but also the devil's. And she described where the alpha of apostasy would have gone if it hadn't been stopped. It was stopped, largely, and that's good. But she gave a description of of what it would have grown into. And so like the alpha of apostasy is like an acorn, and the omega of apostasy is the oak tree. They're related. So the description of what the full-grown acorn would have looked like is really our best description of what the alpha of apostasy will be. There's quite a bit of information. I'm just going to skip most of it just to get right to the end of it, because the very last part of how she described it goes like this. She said the leaders of that movement would think virtue is better than vice, but God being removed, they would place their dependence on human power, which without God is worthless. Their foundation would be built on the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. Now, notice the allusion. She's referring to a biblical story, right? Right here. This is the story of the two houses, the wise man and the foolish man. One built on the rock, the other built on the sand. And the rain came down and the flood came up. And it's important to see what happened there, because there were two houses, but it was the same storm. Only one storm. God didn't say, oh, look, there's a righteous man, I'll send him a few little showers to make his flowers grow, but there's a wicked man over there, so I'm going to hit him with a typhoon. He didn't do that. It's the same storm. Jesus, in describing the houses, never mentioned any difference between them except for one. For all we know, the houses may have looked identical, but there was one difference: the foundation. The wise man's house was not shielded from the storm. It endured the storm because it was built on the rock. So if that's how the omega of apostasy ends up, what's the storm and tempest? And when is all this going to happen? Well, I believe we have a name for that storm and tempest. We call it the little time of trouble. Before the close of probation, as things are getting worse in the world. I'm not a prophet, but right now especially, it's easy to believe that it could be coming soon. The financial, political, medical, social systems in the whole world are close to collapse. Who knows what might trigger momentous events? In any case, whatever the timing, when that storm and tempest all goes down, it won't be pretty. In the last scenes of this earth's history, war will rage. There will be pestilence, plague, and famine. The waters of the deep will overflow their boundaries. Property and life will be destroyed by fire and flood. Well, there's been some of that recently, hasn't there? It's in that setting, as that sort of stuff ramps up. And of course, Greg Conrad says that populous cities will be reduced to ruin. That's bigger perhaps than what we've seen so far. Although, there's the occasional really serious earthquake or really serious hurricane or typhoon that can pretty well reduce the population to ruin. Well, it's in that setting. It's when law and order breaks down, when the medical services are broken down, when society looks like it's just completely falling apart. There will be two groups. There will be one group practicing primitive godliness, the combined ministry of preaching, teaching, helping, healing, practicing self-denial and self-sacrifice, not because they have to, but because they've actually come to trust God so much that this kind of thing is palatable. It tastes good. It's actually palatable to live self-denying, self-sacrificing life. And then there's another group. There will be those who are carrying out the counterfeit, healing the people the no fuss, no muss, no sacrifice needed way. Miracles are great. Faster than fomentations. more fun than temperance, right? Less smelly than oregano oil. What could be better than healing people with miracles? And they will point to the miracles and say, this is the evidence that God is with us. But that's not the evidence that God's with us. The Jews asked Jesus for a sign, and he didn't give them the kind of sign they were expecting. He gave them the sign of condescension, of self-denial and self-sacrifice. And when you're looking at the two houses, it really couldn't be any different. Because the difference between the two houses is the foundation. And the very foundation of Christ's mission was self-denial and self-sacrifice. And similarly, selfishness lies at the foundation of all sin. And so you have these two groups. One doing Isaiah 58, helping people. The other doing something that looks like Isaiah 58, but without any self-denial, without any self-sacrifice. And eventually, as the storm and tempest of deteriorating world conditions catch up to everyone, both teams, both groups, when food or money or clothing or whatever it takes, whatever you need, when that starts to run low, there's going to come a point where the selfish heart says, I'm not giving anymore. Like Lucifer back in the beginning, sin has turned all who have chosen it into liars and murderers. They don't trust God's love. They don't trust his wisdom to care for them. And so they have to take care of themselves. And now, here in the storm and tempest, supplies are low. The selfish heart refuses to give or serve anymore. And when that happens, the structure of this counterfeit Isaiah 58 is swept away. But Christians, they built on the foundation of Christ. What about them? They're in the middle of the same storm. How can it be any different for them? Well, it is different, and it's different for a very, very simple reason. They have confidence in God. Remember the quote yesterday? Faith is a very simple matter. It is confidence in God. They have faith in God's love. They have faith in God's wisdom. They have faith in God's power to supply all that they need. So they go right on serving others even though they don't have anything to do it with. Jesus gave us some examples of that a couple of times. Remember, he turned to Philip and says, why don't we feed them? And Philip, being a rational guy, says, that's going to cost a lot of money. And Jesus said, yeah, well, whatever, just have them sit down. This is the difference between the house on the sand and the house on the rock. This is the difference between primitive godliness and the counterfeit version. This is the difference between the loud cry and the omega of apostasy. Now we have one thread still hanging. I need to at least touch on this and help close it off. And that is this matter of the accusations. This is last time, remember? And I said that the first 6 were resolved by Jesus at the cross. But there were still 3. And they are. There are. At this point, there are still those last 3 to be worked with. How is God going to resolve number 7? And is it in any way involved with what we've just been talking about? Let's look. The remnant people of God are to be representatives to the world of the character of Christ. Well, let's stop right there. That's what Jesus did. Jesus came to represent the Father. And we're to represent Christ. And if you've seen Christ, you've seen the Father. It's the same thing. This is that identical work, right? Not a thread of selfishness is to be woven into their practices. That's because God isn't selfish. That's why. The law of God is lived out. Thus, in the character of God's people, a living testimony will be born that will contradict the fallacy of Satan, who has declared that the law of Jehovah is arbitrary and holds its subjects under cruel bondage. God says, I'm going to show that the law is not arbitrary. Another statement. The Lord Jesus desires through his people to answer Satan's charges by showing the results of obedience to right principles. This is how God proves that the law is not arbitrary. The law is not arbitrary. Mercy and justice are not arbitrary. The law isn't just some set of rules that God decided he liked. I don't know, it looks like a good set. Let's use that. That's not where it came from. People aren't saved or lost because of favoritism on God's part. That's another concept of arbitrary. The law can't be changed. It's not that God won't change it. It can't be changed because it truly describes the difference between the results of obedience to right principles and the results of obedience to wrong principles. If you follow right principles, this is where you end up, refuting Satan's charges. If you follow wrong principles, it doesn't end up well. Let's just put it that way. So we can take number 7 off the list. And then there's number 8. God's law makes forgiveness impossible. It's actually refuted by the same turn of events, the obedience to right principles. Just as obedience to natural law can heal physical illness, obedience to moral law based on faith in God can heal spiritual illness. It's a sozo thing. Healing and salvation at their root are the same. When the universe sees, well, I'll come to that in a second, this healing of God's people, the forgiveness of God's people, isn't the kind of forgiveness where God says, I like those guys, I'm going to take them to heaven, but Satan, you guys, I don't like you, I'm going to just, I think I'm going to burn you guys. That's arbitrary. This forgiveness is not in any sense arbitrary. This is the kind of forgiveness, if you will. Suppose, what could be an example? I'm going to make this up. This doesn't reflect medical reality necessarily, okay? So here's a guy who smoked for 40 years and he's down with lung cancer. Well, he goes into the doctor and he says, yeah, doctor, looks like I've got lung cancer. I need you to issue me a pardon. You can't do that. You can't do that with healing. You can do that with traffic tickets, maybe, right? And the judge might throw the case out or the cop may just give you a warning. But you can't do that with things that are based on the natural results. But maybe, just maybe, the guy with the lung cancer has a really good doctor, or maybe a really good medical missionary. And maybe he actually has some means and some techniques and some herbs and some hydrotherapy and whatever all you can do, some proper nutrition. And if you do this right stuff, follow right principles, maybe, just maybe, that lung cancer will go away. And the guy's not sick anymore. He's been forgiven. He's been sozoed. God's law is perfectly accepting of that kind of forgiveness. And so that one goes away too. Of course, when the universe sees that God told the truth on the whole of the first 8 accusations, well, number 9 says God is lying, that one just simply disintegrates. And at that point, the great controversy can move on. Then we get to the second coming, the millennium. There's more to come. But this is our role to play. This is our moment to shine with the light of God's righteousness. That's the work that needs to be done. That's the work of faith and healing. And I'll close out there. Now, I'll just go ahead for just a moment here. Well, I see the gentleman there getting a mic and all ready. But yesterday, Benji asked a question. Let me respond to that very quickly. Simply put, the question was, is there evidence for the final generation vindicating God's character or God's government or God's law? Is that something that the Spirit of Prophecy supports and should be, held up as a part of last generation theology or final generation theology or whatever you want to call it? I should have been able to answer that last night just off the top of my head, but it was 11:30 at night for me, and so maybe I'll claim I was tired. No, the answer is no. God's character was vindicated by Jesus. The law was vindicated by Jesus. The government was vindicated by Jesus. Yep. That's not what's needed now. What's needed now is simply the demonstration that the law is not arbitrary and that forgiveness is possible. Mm. That's a little bit different thing. Yep. And so I won't go into all of that right now, but I'll just say that, Benji, I sent you a PDF, I think it's about 20 some pages of quotations that illustrate that, and please feel free to share that with anybody else who might be interested. So I'll leave that one at that for right now, and then if there are other questions or however we want to go ahead.
Excellent. Well, look, Dave, it's such a powerful message. I don't think that we'll be stopping listening to you. We may be temporarily, but there's a real heart for medical missionary work where we are right now, and we've got people in the room who have dedicated their life. They want to be part of that work as well. But the message that you've provided really puts meat on the bone, so to speak. We're not going to go... but it really does provide evidence that God's work is to be seen for what it is. It's to glorify God. It's to show that there is life with Christ, and that even though the world pushes vaccines and every other aspect there, the true work is in salvation and revival and restoration. So we're very, very grateful for the work, for the talks that you've given. I have no doubt we'll be asking you to come and talk to us again, because we're going to be buying. I think we've put in a bulk order in for tactics right now, but yeah, we'll be wanting to come back and have another sessions with you as well. We really have appreciated, and I think it's just the dawning, if you know what I mean, of what we're doing. And there's a lot more that we would like to be building on from this time that we've had with you. So yeah, may God be given all the glory for the work that you're providing. You've got a fabulous ministry, a powerful ministry, and we just ask you the blessings on all your work as well. So yeah, we'll finish up with the church has one foundation, a song that we can all sing together, and we'll conclude on that, and we'll keep in touch with you, that's for sure. We totally appreciate the two sessions. It's been in my opinion, I don't know how you can use it any other word, a delight. I've learnt so much, and I really have been inspired from it, so yeah.
Praise the Lord, and just leave you with one final one-sentence summation. Medical missionary work is the central issue of the entire great controversy.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Certainly. Let's bow our heads. Father, I am encouraged to see interest in your work, in that work of primitive godliness. Lord, I've tried to paint something of a picture of how I think that is so important. And of course, if it's that important, the devil will attack it. And so I pray now that you would be with each one of this group and other like-minded groups around the world. Father, there are the visions of trouble on the horizon. I ask that you would be with them, that you would demonstrate your faithfulness, your love, and your power, and that as tests and troubles, as storm and tempest threaten to engulf them, that you would prove to be true as you have always done. May faith find a firm and solid anchor in your word, in your promises, and in you. I pray in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Dave. We just blessed by your words, and we know that it's the Holy Spirit that's leading, but the encouragement and the zeal that we've come out of this message really has fortified us to continue our work. So thank you for being a person that can put it into an imagery that we can clearly see the way forward. So God bless you and keep you.
Praise the Lord, and blessings to you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.